and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to Lakewood Alive, our forum ensuring a vibrant future and a community conversation. My name is James Moran, and I am a Lakewood Alive board member and chairman of the Community Engagement Committee. And just want to thank you for being here. What a tremendous turnout. We really appreciate it. We know a few other folks will be making their way here after our training derailment or whatever occurred out here, small thing. Again, thank you very much for being here. We are in a tremendous facility. It's one that's been in Lakewood. It's a hallmark of our community, the Lakewood Masonic Temple. We also want to thank our other sponsors. They include Lakewood Hospital, Discount Drug Mart, Panera Bread, Lakewood Public Library, and the Lakewood New Life Church. What we're going to try to do tonight is have an honest, open discussion about taking a tremendous community and making it even better. There's a lot of great things that have been happening in Lakewood over recent years. We've gotten some outside recognition, including the best place to raise your kids by Business Week, the best suburb by Scene Magazine, and the coolest, one of 10 coolest suburbs in the United States as determined by Travel and Leisure Magazine. So there's a lot of good things going on, but we know that there's always an opportunity to improve. And inspired by our mayor, who recognized that the 2010 census provides a snapshot, a picture of Lakewood that we only get every 10 years. And we need to take advantage of it to better understand where we are and where we need to go as a community. So that's how we're going to start the evening. We're going to have Mayor Summers, Michael Summers, present some information as context for our conversation, straight from the 2010 census. At that point, we're going to turn to Nate Kelly, our moderator, who's going to introduce the panel. And our panel is going to have a good discussion about what are the issues, what are the things we have to be thinking about as a community, what are the good things that we ought to leverage, what are the watch-outs, etc. And after that panel discussion moderated by Nate takes place, we're going to open it up to your questions. We want the panel to take on your best thoughts and questions. And then we'll wrap it up. And so hopefully about 90 to 120 minutes from now, we'll feel better about where we are as a community, where we're headed, and what we need to be thinking about. So without further ado, let me introduce our mayor, Michael Summers.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Lakewood Alive. Thanks, Masonic all for hosting us, and especially thanks to the panel for being part of the Lakewood knowledge base that we're most anxious to gain from. Well, for those of you who are right-brained, that's the conceptual, poetic side, this is what the census says. Those are the words. But for the left-brained folks, we can take a little walk here. Slightly fewer of us, 56,000 down, about 52, about a 7% drop. So where Lakewood on the left compares to Parma, Heights, and Medgar, everybody dropped. Parma about 5%, the rest of the suburbs about the same as Lakewood, about 7%. So across the region, populations look like we do. This is the racial breakdown of Lakewood. You can see the blue, 84% Caucasian, African American is 6%, and it breaks into American Indian, Asian, Pacific Island, multi-race, and Latino. And you're going to see in a minute how those stack up for the county as well. This is how we looked in 2000 to the left, and this is how we looked in 2010 to the right. Same basic scheme, a little more growth, but not a huge change. So mild shift there. And this is how we look compared to the county. So you see Lakewood on the left, which you've seen 3 times now, and Cuyahoga County on the right. You can see we do look substantially different than the county. And so those are things for us to ponder. The other interesting thing is the big gauge is the African American differential, and the rest of the groups actually hold about the same percentage. Actually, Latinos about 4% in the county, 4% in Lakewood. And I think the same is true of those other subgroups. Asians about 2% in the county, about 2% in Lakewood as well. So that seems to be a pattern there. Educational attainment. I think this was one of the more interesting dimensions of it, and I suspect that has not always been the case. We're 46%. If you start at the purple, which is the associate's degree, 7%. Add the bachelor's degree, 25%. Add the graduate school professional, 14%. 46% of our community has a 2-year degree or better. I think that puts us at a higher end of the educational attainment for the area. This is a bit of an age distribution, and you can see that we're pretty evenly spread. But I think the two that are most noteworthy are the white quadrants at the bottom, the 20 to 40 to 39-year-old. It's actually a dominant share of our population, and I suspect a growing portion of our population. And that gets to the piece where we're a little younger. Poverty, we're a little poor. Actually, there was I suspect that Professor Oak is going to talk about this, but we reflect probably a national trend of poverty moving to the suburbs. And you can see where we stand compared to Cuyahoga County. Lakewood is actually in the purple, Cuyahoga County is in the blue. So in 2000, we had 8.9% poverty level, and today we have about 16%. We actually grew a higher level proportionally than the rest of the county. And that's a pattern that also seems to be holding throughout the country. Income distribution. This is an interesting graph. Now, shows you in the back, basically, we have Lakewood in the top in the blue, you have Ohio in the red, and the United States in the green. And so it allows us to take distribution where we have less than 50,000 at the top, over 200,000. These are household incomes, by the way. And it shows that basically our median household income is somewhere around $43,000. There's two different data points. One's at about 42, one's at about 44. So we'll take the midpoint of about 43,000 per household. And you will see that we mirror really the state of Ohio and the nation until we get to the higher income levels, where we have less proportion of our households at a higher income than the nation. That sort of makes sense. We don't have Wall Street here, we don't have Silicon Valley, we don't have the big high-end income economic drivers that would attach to disproportionately higher incomes. But it does show, I think, that we are a middle-class community with basically a large proportion of our households drifting below $40,000. Remember, median as a measure of central tendency means that half the households are above that mark, half are below. So it's not an average. It's sort of a midpoint of the household recognition. Two last slides, three actually, talking about what our households look like. You see here that family households are about 45% and non-family households are about 55%. So what does that mean? Well, a family household is basically a parent, a husband and wife, or a parent and children. Would be probably the basic elements of what a family looks like. And even within our families, there's many different facets of that. What you see are male with children, female with children, husband and wife, no children, husband and wife with children. All those constitute the 45% which make up the households here. And then the non-family households look just as fragmented. And it's a non-traditional group, male living alone. Mostly a male or a female living alone would constitute a non-traditional family household, which makes for 55% of our households. So when we wake up in the morning, we think about Lakewood, it's appropriate that we reflect that there are many different Lakewoods, and that in terms of the traditional post-World War suburb view of a parent and two children isn't really the predominant nature of our story. So I'm going to turn this over to Nate at this point and see what all this means. Thank you, Mayor.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Nathan Kelly. I now work at Cuyahoga County, and it was so refreshing that for the first time in a long time, when Jay referenced a slow-moving train wreck, he wasn't talking about county government. I work in county now because when Mayor Summers ascended to his post as mayor, his first order of business was to fire me, which apparently got him elected a couple weeks ago. So congratulations. I'm the moderator today, and I want to introduce our panelists. I want to start with Mr. Gus Frangos. Gus, if you'd come up to the table while he's walking up. Gus is the President and General Counsel of the Cuyahoga County Land Bank. And you know the Land Bank. The Land Bank is an entity that actually Gus was a leader in creating the legislation that made it possible to have county land banks in the state of Ohio. The Land Bank is one of our strategies for addressing a housing crisis countywide. Before he took that post and created that entity, he graduated from University of Akron, and not the campus here in Lakewood, and Cleveland Marshall, He has been an attorney, a Cleveland City Councilman, a magistrate judge, and an effective leader for our new county line. Second, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ned Hill. Ned is a Lakewood resident. He's also professor and dean of the Levin School of Urban Affairs here at CSU. He's senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a visiting fellow at University of California, Berkeley. He's on the faculty of economics at an unpronounceable university in Croatia. He's obviously abusing his post to travel the world, an accomplished author and editor, guilty of making many of those of us who have been urban studies students buy his books instead of spending it on beer money, a leader on a number of boards, including the WireNet, Magnet, which is manufacturing, Nortec, technology, and is committed to our region through many ways, including United Way. He is a PhD from MIT. We're glad to have him as a Lakewood resident. I'd like to also invite my friend Marvin Hayes. Marvin is a Cleveland native. He has 12 years of experience in urban economic policy. He has worked for Mayor White, Commissioner Hagan, Governor Strickland, and one thing that you should know that he wouldn't be the one to say is he was a leader for the Strickland administration in crafting urban policy, was in the governor's cabinet as the first director of urban affairs, probably get retired, and really crafted the regional approach to economic development that Ohio is pursuing now effectively and should have been doing a generation ago. I want to also invite Bill Sanderson. Bill Sanderson is a commercial developer for Forest City. He's good at his job in addition to lasting through 3 different administrations of the city of Lakewood. He's like the Castro of commercial development. He has been president of Greater Cleveland's Home Builder Association. He's a leader in green building and development, master builder, certified graduate builder. He's a BW grad, and he and his wife Barb and their 2 kids live in Bay Village. I can tell you firsthand, he's a very persistent negotiator. So if you join me in welcoming everyone. So the focus for our panel today is to help us understand what are the questions we need to be asking as a community, as a public body, to help us craft what is our local urban policy for the city of Lakewood moving forward to advance development in Lakewood. So we have 4 experts in urban development in different verticals of economic development. And I want to start off by saying, please be honest. Help us figure out what are the questions we need to ask ourselves. But first, I want to get a sense from some of the folks that aren't from Lakewood. In terms of commercial development, Bill Sanderson, what is the commercial perspective and prospects for commercial development inside the city of Lakewood?
Thank you for the comment about Castro. I'll take that as the compliment I know you meant it to be. I think, if you describe Lakewood, the word that always comes to mind is diversity. It's a diversity of people, places, and products. That is both a strength and a weakness. Currently, the trend has been with commercial and especially retail development to go towards Walmart, big stores, and people can resist that as a bad model. But the fact of the matter is they're the largest retailers in the world, and they are going to have some share of the market. So the challenge is to find ways to make what you have, which is typically in Lakewood, smaller stores and shops and smaller opportunities for development, have enough unique value that they are able to be marketed. Obviously, one of the really great things about Cleveland in general and Lakewood specifically is there are a lot of small mom and pop and increasingly locally owned producers of all kinds of products. And I guess if I were going to say, what would you want to focus on? That's a strength that the city has to focus on, or choose to redo much of downtown Lakewood. And I think the city has wisely taken the path of trying to see the redevelopment of existing commercial space. People like convenience. They like to be able to not necessarily walk to places, even though they all say they do, but they like to drive. They like to be able to have a reasonably convenient lifestyle, especially nowadays. People are 24/7 with their communications. Kids' lives are much more structured than they used to be. And so time is the premium. To the extent that Lakewood can make itself be a more convenient place to live, that is a huge advantage over, frankly, suburbs and other places that don't have those intrinsic opportunities.
Ned, Bill said that diversity both in our population, the product that we have for commercial development, and what people are looking for are gratefully. How do the stats that Mayor Summers shared with us reflect that diversity and our potential for attracting growth?
Well, first, I want to thank LakewoodAlive, Mike Summers, good friend and good mayor, for putting this together. And Nate, thank you so much for hosting us tonight. I'm doing this like a presidential debate, so that means I can get to say 3 things and I'll remember 2 out of the 3. And we get along pretty well. Either that or I was trying to figure out which Libya I'm really dealing with. A couple things about the numbers were really surprising. And the other thing we have to remember is you can't really compare the 2000 and 2010 census very well for a whole bunch of technical reasons. But here are the things that were surprising. The first thing is this is a much more diverse community than it's been in the 25, almost 30 years we've been living here. Diversity, we tend to focus on race. Racial diversity is moving along slowly, particularly with the African American population. But we went from 2% of our population to being African American to 6%. Latino population went from 2 to 4%. But there are other forms of diversity than the hallmark of Lakewood. There's probably more income diversity in this community than in any other community in the greater Cleveland metropolitan area, which is a testament to the way in which Lakewood has continued to reinvest in itself. The second form of diversity that is difficult to see in the census, but you see it when you walk the streets, bicycle the streets, and get to know Lakewood, is there's probably more religious diversity in this community than in any other in the region. Which is also, we're still doing what Lakewood's always done, is being a traditional home for the new immigrant. And as population pressures change globally, that's still going to be part of what we do. And so that is a testament to the openness and welcomeness of the community. When you look at the data, there are a couple of things which are clear. We lost about 7%, not 7%, but about 8% of our population, just a little bit under the county average, which was actually on the high end for the inner ring suburbs, with the exception of severely distressed places, East Cleveland, standing in mind, and Hillcrest communities. So then you really have to figure out where did that population loss come from. And that's when I really got surprised. It seemed that the population loss came mostly from having smaller families, rather than having large-scale abandonment of the community. So people are invested here, they're doing well, but it's much smaller family units. Then take a look at the other thing that happened is that the increase in poverty higher than the other cities of our size in this region. And Mayor Summers got it absolutely right. The reason why we got an influx of lower-income people here is that housing is very affordable. The housing bust destroyed whole communities in Cleveland, forced people out, and particularly low-income families that have a strong interest in the education and future of their kids are finding opportunities largely in Cleveland Heights and in Lakewood, because these are communities that have invested very, very strongly and heavily in maintaining the quality of their school systems, and a monument of Lakewood believing in its future sitting right across the street with the library. So this is a community that is volunteered to take on. We are not an anti-tax community, we are a smart spending community, and this is a community that stepped forward and said we're investing ourselves over the past decade. That's the reason why the numbers look better than I expected. The other thing that is striking in the census is when you look at the non-family households in the data, you'll see large numbers of single women and single men in the data. I expected that to be basically being a geezer number. Technical word for old folks. I am now in my apprentice geezer mode, so. But it's actually much younger, and what that's really showing is that something happened that Lakewood was able to attract young singles, 20s and 30s, and now the real challenge is how do you hold on to them once they reach the family formation stage. And that really is that's where the optimism comes from the number, and that's really where the threat go forward takes place. And the other last thing that was surprising in the data was the very large number of well-educated individuals in the community. It's not the 46% number that's striking, it's really the number of BAs and above and professionals, which indicates that this is very much a community of choice, and you have to figure out how you respond to that. So here's the important policy lesson that comes from what Lakewood has done and which other communities are looking at places like Lakewood for. The policy lesson is, yes, suburban sprawl and development on the fringe puts lots of pressure on established, built-up communities, but it isn't physics and it's not a death sentence. It's the ability of these communities to invest in themselves, maintain the quality of the housing, reduce the risk of owning a house in the community by maintaining code enforcement, making certain that the streets are safe and this is a walkable community and people still walk, and that you invest in the social capital of the community. That is a recipe that is the antithesis of sprawl. Some people want to have a sprawlistic lifestyle. Some people want a different lifestyle, and this really does, Lakewood has made a choice that presents an alternative to a less dense living environment. The other thing Lakewood has done well, and I'm not saying it because I think a quarter of the politicians in this town are graduates and we're proud of them. Lakewood actually has a history of being a very well-managed community. You know, we can go back and forth about different issues, but at the end of the day, community development block grant monies were spent better in Lakewood than almost anywhere else in the United States. We invested in infrastructure, we invested in neighborhood, and Birdtown today looks better than Birdtown looked in 1980. That's a testament. This is a community that's willing to spend money, but wants to spend money wisely and demands returns. We've gone through very, very painful downsizing with both Mayor Fitzgerald and Mayor Summers, and trying to figure out how we efficiently deliver services, but tough choices have been made, but we're going to come through the other side of it. So the quality of public service in this community is something that we should all be thankful for, and we all should applaud, because damn, they've done a good job.
Gus Frangos, one of the things that Ned said was that in large part we dodged a bullet in terms of abandonment. Can you give us a sense from your perspective as director of the land bank and also as somebody who's not from Lakewood, what is your perspective on the condition of our housing market and a sense of abandonment and how the banks have handled those foreclosures inside Lakewood?
The data that we have at the land bank and our perspective of what we've been discussing here is by looking at trends in foreclosures, trends in tax delinquencies, trends in both private and tax foreclosure. And so what we see is pretty much what Ned was saying. It is a community of choice from the standpoint that you don't see the negative trends of other inner ring suburbs. For example, if you take Euclid and Cleveland Heights and a handful of others, I don't have the data right in front of me, the number of foreclosures, for example, in Lakewood is markedly less than those other inner ring suburbs on a comparative basis. And so certainly quantitatively the foreclosures are less, but also qualitatively, because when you take the foreclosures in all the inner ring suburbs and you apply them as a percentage of total parcels within the city, Lakewood comes out the best in terms of the percentage. The amount of foreclosures are low, and percentage of total parcels is lowest comparable to some of the other inner ring suburbs. So what that's telling us from the land bank standpoint is how do you react, what do we do at the land bank with respect to properties that come our way, or analysis that we're trying to make with this community? It's more one of stability. You know, how do you stabilize, how do you keep stable what's already there? Whereas Cleveland, just to give you the opposite side of it, in Cleveland, there are of course many good areas. There are communities of choice in Cleveland as well. However, on a large scale, pretty much our mission is trying to stave off the hemorrhaging, so to speak. The destabilization has occurred. It's been very, very bad in neighborhoods. I'm talking from a community development standpoint now. Don't look at, like, you know, projects downtown or something like that. Those are all good. I'm talking about neighborhood community development. Whole neighborhoods have pretty much are no longer there. When I was a councilman back in the 80s up to the early 90s, certain neighborhoods and communities that were still predominantly home, they consisted of home ownership, vibrant retail, and it's astonishing. They're just not bad. They're just no longer there in many places. And so our mission there, for example, is to try to manage the chaos, try to remove the blight buried dead. Not so in Lakewood. In Lakewood, it's more of, take a look at the assets that you have. Look at the things that we track, foreclosure trends, loans where hybrids are about to expire, and you're going to maybe see a trend in foreclosure. Taking a look at tax delinquencies as a function of age, as a function of all kinds of factors that come through the land bank data system, and to supply that information to your planner so that you can maneuver around that stuff in a real careful way that stabilizes what is already there. Clearly, in my estimation, you know, Lakewood is one of the approaches to stabilize and keep what you have, because all the trends that we see from the land bank's perspective pretty much support what we saw, you know, by Mayor Summers. I mean, the population is essentially stable. Education is stable. I think 60% of the people here, you know, have between the high school, college, or postgraduate education, and all of the rudiments of stability is here. So I think the challenge would be is, you know, how do you just keep that build up and don't let it slip away? In a situation where you have admittedly difficult market conditions, Lakewood has to be sustainable and holding its own.
Marvin, Gus said that in many ways we're an exception in the county. Where are our peers? Who are our peer communities in the state or the country or the world that we should look at to benchmark ourselves? And why?
I would say, by type, the communities that are similar are places that are similar demographically and economically. So places that are interlinked communities next to core cities are the kind of places that you'll find that are like Lakewood. You're probably going to find those places more in the industrial Midwest, maybe some in the East, not as much in the newer states and communities in the West and South. But Nate, I don't think the question is, you know, how do we look at other communities and kind of compare ourselves to them? Because I think what everyone else has said on the panel, which I completely concur with, is the strength of Lakewood is its both its diversity, also its uniqueness. You become a community of choice because you offer something that's attractive to the marketplace, and people and businesses make their selection because of that attractiveness. And it's not because you followed some model of entering suburban community over a number of years. As Dr. Hill was saying, you make good decisions with the resources that you have. You kind of listen to the community in terms of what the community prizes, and you follow those decisions along over time. Quite frankly, just the consistency of those decisions, the consistency of following a very similar vision over time is something that really helps enhance a community's economic stability. So I think it's more kind of following the long path and the trajectory that the community has already set over a number of years and decades that's led you to this point right now. I mean, I don't think it can be overestimated Lakewood's ability to weather some very, very, I mean, quite frankly, historically challenging economic conditions. I mean, not to cast aspersion, but this is contiguous to the city of Cleveland. And the city of Cleveland has tremendous economic challenges over many decades. Not just from things like bad management. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying more. The city of Cleveland's had its challenges because the economy has changed, because jobs have gone away through attrition from either technology or going overseas. So for this community to be in the position that it is, its infrastructure being whole, it's kind of the median income being where it is, attracting younger people. These are all good metrics that say you're doing the right things. So keep following the trajectory that you're on. Don't look to other communities and think there's the rainbow over there.
Bill, in a context of uniqueness, how does a community, or what questions does a community ask themselves? Potentially, what are the answers to captivating the attention of professional developers for commercial or residential when a larger national developer may look at a map and deal in a set of communities that are alike? How do you market yourself as one that's unique to get outside investment?
Currently, in this market climate, that's very difficult because there's been a segregation of investment, and investment has gone to where there's the highest, most likely return. And unfortunately, depending on your perspective, those tend to be what's called the aspirational cities. New York, Chicago, places where if you're going to buy home real estate, there is a likelihood that the real estate is going to significantly appreciate over time. And with very few exceptions, those larger cities, although they do experience a wobble, they don't usually experience a crash. Some of that is a function of the number of people. In a market like Northeast Ohio, we're not going to have the kind of influx that's going to allow us to continue to build more and more and more. So the development needs to be more finely targeted and specifically to Lakewood. Again, it has to build on what are the unique things that are here, what will create demand to be either close to those or to have access to those, which would be schools, local shopping, convenience to the airport, to the freeway. One of the things that I was thinking about as we were talking, reviewing what we were going to talk about tonight, in some ways, Lakewood is like the rest of the suburbs. I think the concept here is it's an inner ring suburb because it's close to Cleveland. But the reality is over the last 40 years, the jobs have migrated from the central business district and the flats to all over the suburb. So essentially, Lakewood needs to be able to turn and look west as well as look east to understand where do we fit within that environment. What are the things that we can do to improve being able to compete as the center of a regional economy and not just an inner suburb that happens to be close to Cleveland. And I will tell you, traffic, transportation, access to transit, access to the freeway, access to the airport, those are all things that I think will continue to drive highly educated, highly mobile population that has currently landed in Lakewood. So we'll focus on those kind of infrastructure assets that yield some good results.
Nate, I'd like to comment on a couple of things Bill said. The first is having American Greetings move out to Westlake can actually be an opportunity for Lakewood. One, we already have a lot of American Greetings employees in the community, but the other thing is American Greetings doesn't pay wages so that everybody can afford to live out in Westlake. And so the same way with Shaker's learned to look at the rapidly growing city of I-271 Ohio, we're going to have to pay attention to some of the other, what's taking place out in North Homestead and what's taking place to the west. The other thing is someone who I think spends an inordinate amount of time in the airport. The airport is actually becoming a secondary downtown on its own. And the fact is, your plane lands, if you're smart enough not to check your bag, you're home in 20 minutes. Very, very different if you're in the higher prestige eastern suburbs, which are the gateways to Pittsburgh. But your question about the type of developer is we have to pay attention to Cleveland paradox. Cleveland is a national center for very large global real estate companies. You've got Forest City, think about the Wolfstein's companies. We go through about 5 or 6 very big companies. Their minimum scale they need to invest in a project is so big that they have difficulty working in built-up areas that don't have lots of vacancies. If I look at other cities that have taken other development strategies, look at Portland, Oregon, they've taken an infill strategy and really encouraged small developers and the real estate owner to turn into a developer because the minimum scale of the deal is so small that they can now operate at a much smaller level. And Lakewood's going to be an infill town. So if we sit there and say, gee, is developers diversified going to come in here and do a big deal here, and we pin success on that? No, they aren't going to come in here because the deals just aren't going to be big enough. So this really is, it's going to be the entrepreneurial developer that's going to make the difference here, much more than the big established real estate company.
Gus, in residential terms, how does the land bank work to facilitate that sort of infill, small-scale redevelopment?
The answer, of course, is going to be different in Lakewood versus Cleveland. In Lakewood, that one way to look at the land bank is it's 100 small stories. That's how I like to characterize it. We have the issue of immediacy. We're building properties, at a scale of about 110 per month. So there's a real immediate need to try to be creative and try to dispose of these properties in ways that are meaningful. But like we have already done in several cases in Lakewood, by working with the development department, the community development department, we're able to go and find situations where there is blight, or where there is vacancy, where there is abandonment, and we try to go in there and match that with some kind of end use. That's not always very easy, it's very difficult. What that does, when you do go in there with that in mind, you're able to if I had the brochure, I could go through the stories, but they're literally like everything from an urban garden to a side yard for a neighbor, to a playground for a church that needs to expand for its daycare, where there once was a blighted structure. And it's literally hundreds of dispositions like that the land bank does. What does that do? That's a small little thing in and of itself. But if you look at a church, for example, in Lakewood, or some kind of small business in Lakewood, next to which is an abandoned structure, something that's destabilized, the land bank can take that property, cleanse the title, put it to productive use. You're not just solving that one little problem, but you just stabilize the millions of dollars of tax base, because that's blight of that nature is what causes people in and around the little concentric ring around that blight to come to the Board of Revision and ask for their property values to be reduced. And nobody likes to pay taxes, but that's a basis for thousands and thousands and thousands of appeals that are currently in the Board of Revision and that have been in the Board of Revision. But not so much here, Cleveland, but definitely existent here. That problem does exist. And so to the extent that we can work surgically with your community development department to go into those areas where there's that little bit of pressure and make those small little fixes, I call them 100 little stories, that's a way in which we stabilize a large-scale tax base. There are studies that show, and I would assume Ned would be able to confirm this, that if you take a particular property and it's blighted and it's sitting there, it affects negatively up to 40% of the value of the property within a 500-foot radius of that. Then you go out 1,000 feet, it affects it like 20% or whatever the number is. But the point is, when you consider for a moment that a vacant abandoned property or a property that's in distress is affecting within a 500-foot radius the values of properties, whether it's comparables or however an appraiser figures it out, that's potentially staggering. That's millions of dollars of taxpayers being affected by one property. Sometimes, it passes through the radar and it's undetected. But if you have an appraiser and they see a number of comps, they don't always have the luxury of being able to pick and say, this comparable sold for $100,000, this comparable sold for $500 because it was vacant and they will discount that. No, that gets put into the equation and it just corrupts comparable values on a large scale. So the land bank's role in communities such as this, I would characterize it as surgical. We can work with your own department, and we have, and we do. We work on that basis to try to stabilize.
Mark, moving out of surgery and into general practitioner. How do we do the same, residential or commercial?
Or you do the same?
How do we tell 100 little stories?
Well, just listen to the Doug's comments and reflecting on Ben's comments. I think you have to stick with the assets that really make Lakewood. When you're talking about residential development, what you're really talking about, just as you are with commercial, you're talking about investments. So when you look at Lakewood, what do you have? Proximity to the lake, proximity to downtown, proximity to jobs in the suburbs, proximity to good schools, proximity to unique retail. Those are all assets. Those are all positive things that someone will make an investment decision based on, right? So your opportunities are to kind of go where your assets lead you. I think one of the more telling statistics in the census is the fact that you're growing 20 to 30 somethings by population. That is an incredibly good metric. I mean, what we see in the urban development field broadly is that there is this move back to urban living. There's pent-up demand for urban living, urban experience, but quality urban experience. And it's both for reasons in the job market. The jobs are kind of aggregate in dense urban areas. Incomes rise faster in dense urban areas, but it's also for the desire for amenities. Dense urban communities can produce museums. If you have a lot of people, you can fund the operation of a museum or a very high quality library. So that combined with the natural amenities, the park system, the lake, these are things that make Lakewood a very unique place in terms of being positioned for growth in the future, both on the commercial and on the residential side, but particularly on the residential side. So, it really is kind of a more of a surgical approach in terms of, and I don't think, I don't think Lakewood is in a position to have to worry that much about, well, how do we, create the next big mass development of homes to grow our city. You're going to be able to grow just based on the assets that you have and the attractiveness of the community. So it really is, I think we have the opportunity, lucky, for a more surgical approach to residential development.
If I could just add one statistic, I just read today that mobility in the United States, which means people that own their homes moving to new homes, is the lowest it's been since 1959. Maybe I would.
Well, no, it's the lowest it's been since the end of the Great Depression.
So while that's a challenge for people in real estate, I think there is perhaps a golden opportunity, because what that means for Lakewood is there are people that are living here now that may or may not desire to move somewhere else, but you have a couple of years when you start to sell them on why they should be here, and to convert those renters to potentially owners, and to convert those first-time home buyers who buy a condo into a larger home, and even potentially for empty nesters who love Lakewood and want to stay here, into a housing opportunity that's more consistent with their needs, either a one-level condo or nursing or whatever. And I guess to be an optimist, that is an opportunity, because I think in the past, one of the things that Lakewood was known for statistically was a lot of people move in and move out, move in and move out. Well, that's slowed down, so now is the time to really, have these kind of forums and really, find a strategy and try to execute that strategy while there's still some time.
Let me ask the whole panel. What are some of the trends? We're talking about big trends that we see up on the screen, things that we read about in the newspaper. But what are some of the things that we can do locally? Some of the micro trends that we can actually affect, that we're not at the mercy of these macro forces. What are the things that as a community or local leadership we should be focusing on? What are the levers that we can pull?
First thing, this is a difficult thing to say out loud, but we really do have to be worried about the tax cost and the cost of running and operating our current government. We are a high-tax community. Again, I celebrate the fact that we made a series of choices to invest in ourselves, so we deal with this from an investment base and just a pure spending base. But we have to realize that when you deal with property taxes and wage taxes, it's expensive. So that means the one thing we really can't control is what's the value proposition, and really make a clear statement about what you're getting for the taxes. And also, what are some of the inclusive things we're doing with our taxes? I mean, this is people choose Lakewood because of the diversity of the community, and maintaining a diverse community is expensive. And I don't think we should shy away from it. We should wrap our arms around it. But at the same time, one of the things that I think is positive in Lakewood's future is we now have county government that's realizing it's got to deal with the cost of county government, and the services are there. I think we've now had 2 administrations in a row in the city of Lakewood that are taking very seriously the responsibility of delivering services at a reasonable tax cost. And that's just going to get harder. We just know it is. The other thing which I'm seeing in Lakewood that's consistent with what some real estate developers have talked to me. For example, if you talk to the folks at Corp Development that run Shaker Square, the retail is not doing well there at all. The restaurants are doing gangbusters. What we've seen with the internet is decimating local retail, and we're a community that actually uses retail stores almost as wallpaper when we do our walking. It's kind of visually interesting. But it means, and the number of retail channels is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So when we're dealing with commercial and residential and the streetcars, streets that we have, Madison, Detroit, that really means that there's going to have to be an increase in the number of restaurants because that's where demand is, particularly all the singles who don't know how to cook. The second thing realizing is entrepreneurial small startup retail is probably what's going to be there, which means that the code enforcement, getting an inspector there in time, making certain that the compliance costs are low, the people that know how to navigate City Hall, and we should benchmark ourselves to San Jose, California, where if you go to the City Hall of San Jose, you've got 50 open desks in there. The person comes in with a permit, they sit at the desk, and all the departments rotate you, and you have guaranteed you're out in 3 hours. You wouldn't even think you're in California, it works so well. But there was a realization from joint venture Silicon Valley that it was taking 24 months to get your permits cleared in Silicon Valley, and the life of the machines and the plants was 18 months. Well, then that spirit of efficiency is really taken over. And so getting rid of the hassle factor is really important. And here's the other big trick, and it's tough for cities. You have to make certain you run your permitting operations not as a source of income and revenue, but as a source of services. So when I'm running through a number of cities, I'm not saying Lakewood's one, because I don't know the finances that well, but I work with a number of big cities that look at the permit revenue as an important source of city revenue, and they get nervous when the fees aren't there. As opposed to saying, no, we should make it as cheap as possible, protecting the citizens, lowering the hassle factor, because a very big corporation will just armor up and deal with it. The small entrepreneur might just say, yeah, I'm going to go somewhere else. So we have to be very sensitive about that because our commercial strips are going to depend on entrepreneurs.
Mark?
I would just echo that last comment heavily because I will point to but there are a couple of specific examples in my head where challenges with the development process caused a location decision to go another way. And it had tremendous impact on the community. And it was but for just simple blocking and tackling, good governance, good process. So I think, you know, Lakewood has a good tradition behind doing those things right. I would say just keep doing that. To other kind of trends to follow or the trends to look at. I mean, you know, we've talked, I think, really positively about Lakewood to this point. One of the things that I think you do have to say, and I think this is true for all communities, certainly in Northeast Ohio, is that you know, no community is an island. All of these communities are going to be affected by the conditions of the places that are contiguous to them and to the region in which they exist. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Lakewood does need to look very specifically at downtown Cleveland when it looks to what do we need to do and how are we positioned going forward in the future. I mean, as I said before, the trends of location decisions among certain demographics, especially the ones that are growing, are looking at moving to more urban areas for a number of reasons. I mean, I would say, I mean, it's a difficult proposition, but Lakewood needs to be engaged in the conversation of, you know, the local region, meaning Cleveland and Rocky River and Westlake to the west, but also the broader region. What kind of industries can Lakewood reasonably attract? How do those industries mesh with other industry clusters in the region? What are who are the workers that will be in those industry clusters? What kinds of quality of life kind of things will those folks want to make their lives more convenient? Do you need a public transit conveyance that goes directly from Lakewood to downtown Cleveland? Does that make sense? And those are big investment decisions for a community of this size. But if you're looking strategically, you know, 5, 10, 20-year horizon in terms of what your development situation is going to look like, you know, a community that has some advantages, has some stability, has some potential for growth. Now's the time to start looking at those strategic plays and what you can do to capture opportunities that are in the future. I mean, it's, you know, Bill and I were talking a little bit earlier. One of the challenges with development is risk is inherent in development. Mm-hmm. You have to put resources in. You have to make commitments. So you have to make bets about the way the world is going to be, and that's a difficult thing to do. But you can't get around the fact that, you know, every community looks kind of to the next community or the economy above it to find out what its life is going to be like and what its opportunities and challenges are going to be in the future.
I want to actually, Marvin, sharpen up what you're saying a little bit. Traditionally, historically, the value of homes in Lakewood really depended on job growth in downtown Cleveland. That's not going to change. The airport helps. Being access out to Westlake is going to help. But the fact is, our real estate values depends on job growth and job stability in downtown Cleveland. And we just have to realize that we're tied at the hip. There's an opportunity right now, since the occupancy rate of housing in downtown Cleveland is now higher than 95%, and developers can't get the money to develop new housing. There should be a real estate building in downtown Cleveland right now, except for the fact that banks can't make loans on commercial real estate. That's actually one of the reasons why we see the numbers of young adults coming into this community. They're being rationed out of downtown Cleveland. Downtown Cleveland right now has the highest number of downtown residents it's ever had in its history. It's now north of 10,000 residents. The number 25,000 residents for a viable downtown has been bandied about for a long period of time. And the fact is, downtown Cleveland can actually house 40,000 residents at some point. Now, that is an opportunity for Cleveland because that's the incubator that starts our housing market, but it's also going to be a challenge to the Gold Coast because someone who's choosing between living in downtown Cleveland is actually right now choosing large parts of the Gold Coast. And so that value proposition is going to be there. And I personally hope, as a Lakewood resident, that what it's really going to do is going to wipe out the condominium market for the dinks in the far suburbs. Double income, no kid. But the growth of downtown Cleveland is going to be a competitive threat for a short period of time to the Cedar Fairmont neighborhood in Cleveland Heights. It's going to be a threat to the middle income parts of Shaker Square, and it's going to be initially a threat to the West 117th Street neighborhood in Gold Coast. So that really means that when that happens, we have to be particularly vigilant on code enforcement, maintaining the quality along the West 117th Street strip, the Gold Coast, as well as kind of the Detroit Avenue, eastern end of Detroit Avenue. We know it's there, but we have to think about it ahead of time. In the long run, having a vibrant housing market in downtown Cleveland is in our best interest, but for a period of about a decade, it's going to be a little tough.
Bill, what point is that?
Well, I just wanted to quibble slightly. You know, if younger populations are choosing urban areas, I don't think that Lakewood's problem has ever been attracting young people. When I graduated from college in 1980, all of my roommates moved to Lakewood. And subsequently moved out, and I think that's long been recognized. The challenge for Lakewood is people love moving here. Unfortunately, they've chosen to move out, and I think the investment in the schools, rightly, will yield some great benefit. However, I was talking to Sean before, and you know, we always said in our model, if you have excellent schools, problem solved. You'll sell every house, there'll never be an issue. And what we're finding now in this current environment is Lakewood does have excellent schools, as do several other inner ring and near ring suburbs, and it hasn't proven to be the magic bullet that we had all hoped it would be. And while I think it's still a good long-term bet, I think there needs to be a serious self-examination of what are the things that would convert those current residents, younger residents, to renters and to residents. And you know, renters rent for two reasons. They choose to, or they have no choice through economics. Buyers have a whole laundry list of reasons why they become buyers. The first is, of course, they're able to, which in this environment financially is difficult. That's one of the policy decisions that the city of Lakewood could perhaps investigate, similar to the way Cleveland had a soft second. And while there is a moral hazard there, it's also a very, very effective way. It could be tied to people that are already renting. That if you know, it's almost like a homestead benefit for people to rent that convert into the owner. You know, there's some kind of financial arrangement that's beneficial to them. So, you know, I think the challenge is, and has been for a long time, getting those people to stay and then become a part of the community, and then you know, the whole thing starts to take off, as Ben indicated.
Bill, that's not good, that's smart.
Gus, anything to add?
No, it's very difficult to add to what was said here because it's just so comprehensive. I can bet if I could, you know, put on tape what you just said there and carry it around, that would be great. But
For 3 beers, you get it, Gus.
especially if you pay for them. But you know, I'm not a Lakewood resident, but I have a perception of Lakewood. When I was married, I lived downtown in one of the apartments. And my wife and I, when we had time, where did we go? We always came to Lakewood. We went to the park and we just hung out. We fished, we hung out. Then when we had kids, we started bringing the kids there until finally the apartment was small and you know, we moved to a home. But even then, when, you know, don't ask me why, there was parks in Cleveland, but we would always come to Lakewood. And you know, and I look at some of the demographics, and you know, it's great to have families, it's great to have people staying in here, you want them to stay here. But your demographic also is that 5% or whatever it was of single people and professionals, and that's something to embrace. When I think back, I almost moved to Lakewood until I got the apartment, but I was a professional at a law firm, and this was the place. It was so easy. It's just 5 minutes off the highway, and here I was. So, you know, embracing that and building off of what the reality is and the reality of your population, the amenities. I think, you know, what do those people like? They like the arts. They like, you know, sale. They like
bars.
They like honest government. I was going to say that. But the one thing I wanted to ask, and this is just a assumption, I'm totally wrong about this. When I think of a challenge, to Lakewood, aside from the typical things like making sure that you have code enforcement, making sure you have good services, et cetera, to keeping the cost of government low. I think of large stretches like the coast and in a climate like we have now, those buildings, I have to believe that several of them, some of the condominiums have undergone foreclosure. They have all those issues going on right now, and plus they're being devalued, so it's very difficult to get out of those condominiums if you needed to get out of them. Somebody lost their job or whatever. But unlike a home, which it may decay, and certainly it has effects on the neighborhood. What do you do in a situation like that where everybody's dependent on the condo fees and they're dependent on all the contributions that go into keep that whole thing stable? Maybe somebody has an answer to that, but I have an impression in my mind, my instincts tell me that that's a threat, that's some bit of a threat in this environment.
It's really hard to provide everyone, or to serve demand that's out there across the state in terms of what people want to help their communities grow and develop. So the approach that ends up happening is described in the term spreading peanut butter, where you give a little bit, and it's not enough to do really anything that's really impactful. But you spread a little bit to every community across the state, and you basically tamp down the dissent and argument, and because everybody got a little bit. But no one got enough to really do anything impactful or do anything important. Lakewood is a community where you have an opportunity, based on its size, based on its advantages. You have an opportunity if you have consensus, if you keep consensus in terms of development strategies going forward, to make impactful investments. And it's a very difficult thing for any community of any size to keep up. But I think good leadership and engaged and involved citizenry are good steps to doing that. So I would say that's kudos to the Lakewood community for having that sense, but keep it going because the challenges, as Ned was saying, are going to continue and they're going to get worse. There's not enough money to go around. The recession we're in, to my mind, is really a historic restructuring of the way our economy works, particularly if you're talking about Midwestern economies. So making smart and right decisions is going to be more and more important as you go forward. So the challenges, the things that all communities have to think about, quite frankly, the number one thing for any community, anywhere in Ohio or in the Midwest, is jobs. And where do the jobs come from? We as communities and we as practitioners who think about economies need to really come clean with the public that we're in a very serious restructuring of our economy in this country. But it's hitting particularly hard in economies like ours. I've read several authors who I respect greatly, and these are kind of the impressions I've come away with, such that, and this is something that the Lakewood community can think about going forward. We are, as a culture, when we talk about jobs and employment, we're a culture that kind of had a paradigm of, well, you go to school, you get an education, you work hard, you develop the values, you go just as far enough in your education to get a good job and sustain yourself, and you keep that job and go forward over time, and then you retire. That paradigm may not be with us anymore, or at least it's changing drastically. Many more of us, certainly the younger generation, I'll say that before you, the younger generation coming up, they're going to have to think about being entrepreneurs. And not as a, gee, wouldn't it be nice, as a, this is my ticket to a middle-class lifestyle. That means taking risks. That means being more thoughtful and creative about what value I bring to an economy. So when the city of Lakewood, when the community thinks about, that kind of significant shift in the way the economy works, what things can you do to help, build or help facilitate entrepreneurship in your community? Are there things that the city can help provide? Certainly, the blocking and tackling of processes that, permitting processes, and things like taxes and business taxes make a difference in terms of making the community attractive for entrepreneurship. So thinking about how the economy changes and what things that the local community can do for itself is probably a good approach to the challenges that are here and will stay with us for quite some time.
I'll first start with the macroeconomic rebuttal, and then I'll talk about challenges. A couple things that are taking place in the macroeconomy. The long-term decline in the value of the dollar is hugely important for the Midwest. Having overvalued dollars kick the living hell out of the economy. The recovery in the United States, believe it or not, has been led by manufacturing. Believe it or not, has been led by manufacturing in Ohio. The largest investment opportunity that we're going to see in the next 15 years is shale gas development. Shale gas is hugely important for Northeast Ohio. Give you just a few examples. USX Kobe Steel out in Lorraine. USX, the company X means we don't know what the hell we're doing. Finally figured out that building pipe is a good thing. They've added a third shift, just building pipe for the oil shale development that's currently underway. D&M Steel, Youngstown had that plant's what, about 3-4 years old, Jay? 4 years? And they just doubled the size of the plant this year. Yes, fracking is huge. I have now patented the bumper sticker, frack this. We're going to retire on it. But the fact is that the fracking controversy is important, but as I think Rockefeller may have said once, while the meek shall inherit the earth, they will never get the mineral rights. The industrial base is going to be hugely important, and I can go on and on to show gas route, but that's not Lakewood, but it's huge. And by the way, the Utica Shale goes west of us, and the Utica Shale actually has more liquids in it and is going to be essentially lead to the revitalization of the plastics industry. The question is, how do we deal with the environmental issues that are huge? All right, now for Lakewood. There are three things that are immediate that we have to pay attention to. One is we have to realize that while the poverty rate increased in the county by 4.8%, it increased in Lakewood by 7.1%. So we do have neighbors that are poor, we have neighbors that are distressed, and we have children who are growing up in poverty. We think the other side, though, is cities cannot redistribute income, because if you redistribute income too aggressively, people move. Particularly those with the income that gets redistributed. So we have to make certain that we provide services, that we partner with the county as much as we can, and move away from direct service provision and make certain that we're doing service advocacy. Shared services are our future, and we have to realize that we just can't do it on our own. At the same time, we as a community made this decision a long time ago that we are an inclusive community, which includes the poor, and we're a community of opportunity, which education is a part of it, as well as children's services. But we have to make certain that the behaviors in the streets never deteriorate, that public important is highly valued, and that we make certain that we have a set of standards and conduct on the streets so not one citizen of Lakewood ever feels threatened. The moment we lose it, we lose the city. So that's the poverty issue. Second major stress we're going to have is that there is going to be a huge shift in property tax values in the county. Lowering of property values is not even across the county, it's not random. So those places that held their values are going to be carrying a larger share of the county-wide tax burden. And that shift's coming in our direction, which is going to make it more difficult to raise local taxes because we're going to be dealing with county tax issues. The third big issue, and this is a managerial issue the city's going to have to deal with, is what does shared services really mean? How much control over local services we're willing to give up, and how do we deal with our public employee unions? And in the middle of this huge earthquake that first Mayor Fitzgerald and now Mayor Summers have dealt with, they've actually done it in partnership with our public service employee unions, which everyone should be congratulated on, but we need to keep it going, and we have to figure out how we take total quality management techniques and continuous improvement techniques and employ them so that the workforce is our partner in this rather than our enemy. And it's never going to stop. Those are my feelings.
It's up back to phone. So these are conversations that I hear a lot in other places that for reasons that I can't fully explain, I don't hear in Lakewood, and I spend a fair amount of time here even though I don't live here. So perhaps they're going on, but they're just happening in the bars that I'm not allowed to go to. You know, for being a former streetcar suburb, Lakewood has, my observation, has some transit assets that they have not been able to fully leverage. And every place else in the country is killing themselves trying to figure out how to build light rail, and yet, you know, the access to light rail in Lakewood is less than optimal. And it could be as simple as creating a travel path so that everybody knows that, you know, follow the yellow brick road to the train. And while the bus service is what regional transit can be, and unfortunately Mayor Summers had to make some very difficult decisions along with council about some transit, those really young, smart people really kind of dig buses and trains. And, you know, that's something that can enhance their experience and perhaps be something that would, again, make Lakewood a little bit more unique than a lot of our competitors. It's not going to happen in Westlake. It's not going to happen in Bay Village. So that's the thing that you could set aside.
But just one thing, Bill, what we have learned in Cleveland, Cleveland's a leader on this, is you don't need light rail, you do it with BRT, bus rapid transit.
Well, I'm not saying build more, I'm just saying make sure that whatever you have, you fully leverage and everybody understands it. I mean, this is a little bit of a pet peeve for me, so forgive me just a second. I think that the RTA should go to every grade school and every kid. Every year I learn how to get on and off the bus. So by the time they're in high school, they're completely comfortable with it because, you know, many of us spoiled the heck out of our kids and, you know, didn't let them ride on the bus. And, you know, all of a sudden they don't have any value for it because it's scary and foreign to them. And if you don't give them that experience, they don't get it. You know, they don't have users. If you go to Chicago, you can't hardly travel around. So you'll learn how to get to the train station, and once you do it, it becomes convenient second nature. The second thing is there's a thing called the walkability index, and much to my surprise, Lakewood was, while fairly walkable, didn't score as high as I thought it would. And I think, you know, one of the questions you have to ask again is for a city that values young people and, you know, very walkable lifestyle, what are the things that are keeping that score from being 100? And they're probably relatively small, relatively easy to tackle. It just takes some understanding and focus. While Lakewood has some fantastic park assets, my overall feel, and I think from talking to neighbors in the Rockport Square area, is that while it has great, big, wonderful parks, because of the size of the schools where typically the playground equipment exists, Lakewood is a little bit underparked for the density, underparked, not even parks, for the density of the development. And so, you know, working with Gus, if there was a property that was perhaps able to be acquired by the land bank through unfortunate circumstances, would a better use of that property be to, you know, create a little neighborhood playground park with just enough equipment, not much maintenance, certainly open so that it's safe, and I think, you know, neighbors would certainly value that. And again, I think it adds to the, I'm living here now, if I was going to be married and have kids, what would make me think about staying or walking half a block down to the playground? Maybe that one little thing. And, you know, you've got all these young, smart people, so I think there is a spirit in the country now of volunteerism. And as you mentioned, there's a rich tradition of service and religion in Lakewood. And the time is now to get those young people engaged in the civic debate, show them the opportunities. I'm not saying that you replace police service with volunteers, but boy, as an augmentation where everybody is thinking about their community, and taking ownership. There's an opportunity to leverage perhaps manpower that you can't buy in the police. But if you get people involved with the police and neighborhood watch where they're comfortable and are part of that solution, then I think you can create some.
Great. Well, those are all good questions. I'd like to ask the audience for their good questions. We have two microphones up on either of these aisles. If you just start off with your name and ask your question, we'll toss it to the panel.
Okay, first of all, my name is Mary, and I just want to say I'm like the demographic. A woman, single woman, two family, 40 years old, highly educated, and it's kind of interesting to see. My question is, I see a lot of the competition is actually not downtown Cleveland, but the planned multi-use zones that are cropping up, like the Crocker Parks, that are, if you go there, the traffic, foot traffic, the retail traffic, the entertainment traffic, the movies, is tremendous compared to downtown Lakewood. And now Lakewood has lost its last theater, and the retail shops are so how do we compete? How do we compete, or how do we become different than the Crocker Parks, so that there is Lakewood is a destination place?
You know, to some extent, you're not going to out Proctor Park out.
Right.
So again, I think the theme has been to focus on the assets that you do have. What Lakewood has that Crocker Park can never have is authenticity. And there are certain people that will value it. There are other people who won't, and you're not going to get them. Just like people that want to live in Westlake probably don't want to live in Lakewood, and that's okay, because there's comfortable. But again, it's the local entrepreneur that has the small shop, it's the restaurants, and it's the local food movement, to the extent that you can, promote that. Urban gardens, farmers markets are a little bit more difficult because those are typically people coming in from outside. But I think a recognition is you're not necessarily going to beat them, but that doesn't mean that you can't compete. And this is not a zero-sum game. And unfortunately, in our area, the population isn't growing, so we can kind of move it around. Now, 20 years ago, everybody wanted to build a mall. When's the last time you were in an indoor mall? And the lifespan of those has gone from 25 years to 10 years. And now they're tearing down malls and building Crocker Parks. And so you have to ask yourself, well, lifestyle centers are really cool, but what's the next iteration? My guess is that Lakewood will live through all of those trends. That doesn't mean there won't be up and down, but it all centers around convenience to the extent that you can take a transit type of thing, you can walk, you can ride your bike. That was one of the other things. Again, most cities are killing themselves trying to build bike lanes and stuff, but it doesn't seem to be as big of a question, and maybe people here don't want a bunch of bike lanes running through town, but
I do.
Let's try another question.
I just want to respond to Mary's question a little bit. First thing I just love is Legacy Village is absolutely perfectly named because it's neither a legacy nor a village. And I can't resist a cheap joke. There are a couple of things to pay attention to. The first thing is vacancies are going to continue to increase in retail because the biggest challenge to retail is now the net and UPS. And what you're seeing in Crocker Park is a shift, so they're trying to get more like a downtown. Second thing that's going to happen with Crocker Park, and developers are friends, and it's it's probably the best lifestyle mall I've seen, and it's very high quality. But as soon as American Greetings opens up there, there's going to be gridlock like you've never seen, and it's going to make it difficult. And a large portion of what Crocker Park does, it is now the West Shore's downtown. And so in many ways, they're going to be shifting more towards restaurants, more towards apartments. They're going to be trying to deal with American Greetings traffic, some of which we're going to take advantage of here. So what you're going to see is the retail along the streetcar, our main streets. It's going to have more restaurants in it. It's going to be, again, go back to entrepreneurship, and it is going to be back towards authentic. We are going to have a problem with the very small retail spaces because they probably aren't Economic, the other thing is a lot of our retail spaces have apartments that are producing income above it. So if they do a major rehab downstairs, they may have to rehab the whole building. There's probably enough income coming from the apartments to allow them to keep those ground floor retail spaces empty. And we have to figure out how to deal with that problem. I think you actually will wrestle with that. Yeah.
Tom Yanks, I'd like to go back to the earlier discussion on benchmark ourselves against other cities. And every time I see something on Lakewood, we're always compared to the inner suburbs, Parma, Goodman, Euclid, East Lakewood. And to some extent, I think we do it because we're entering suburbs well because it makes it feel a little bit better than neighborhoods. But when I look at benchmarks, I look at the industry I'm in, I benchmark within my industry, but I also want to look outside of that industry to make sure I'm doing my comparisons are still good compared to the outside. So what are some better benchmarks that we should be looking at? Should we, when I look at all those charts, best location, whatever, I always look at Rocky River because I think Rocky River's got a lot of things going for it. And so why don't we benchmark more against that? And are there other kinds of, if I go back to the inner ring suburbs to benchmark, and we're all, and not saying we are, but we're all going down, hey, great, we're still doing better than them, but when I look around, wait a minute, we're all at the bottom now, so that didn't do us any good. So what are some better benchmarks for us to compare ourselves to?
If I could take just a quick crack at that at the start of the whole benchmarking conversation, I tend to have a problem with just because, I just take Bill's example of Lakewood's opportunity to maybe do something with regard to transit that might be a differentiator. Rocky River or West Lakes or Mayville can't do that. And that makes you, that opens you up to a market that those places won't have. So the opportunity inside of a regional economy is to be a bit different, to make a value statement that others can't make. Well, I think there are some general things, with regard to benchmarking, affordability, access to amenities, density of employment. These are kind of things that you can benchmark against, but within one economy that doing the work that I've done, my concern is that sometimes we as communities kind of get focused on how am I competing with my neighbor, and so it's a zero-sum game mentality. Well, we grew by 50 residents last year, and they grew by 75, so we've got to out-compete them. It's a macro statement, but we're all in a regional economy, and our economy is competing with economies across the globe. And that's a very real statement because people are a lot more mobile than they ever were. That mobility translates into employment. We don't stay in jobs for 30 years anymore. So the competition is for a young person who has a 35-year employment span ahead of them, and the location decision that they might want to make with regard to where's my job opportunity, but also what's my quality of life. And it's not just Lakewood versus Parma. It's really Lakewood because, and Parma's not a consideration because Lakewood has what I want. So there will be people who want Lakewood, there will be people who want Parma. The growth will come as the region gets more attractive. Because then people will make general location decisions. Hey, the Northeast Ohio, they're a Cleveland region, they're growing jobs, the quality of life is improving there, and then you'll get the segmentation within the market of the person who's more attracted to Lakewood versus another community.
Okay, let's do 2 more questions.
One of the things that I think that is a barrier to people staying in Lakewood is the housing. And I think it comes down to square footage, numbers of bathrooms, size of master bedrooms, and closets. So the outer charm is fabulous. It's not about raising properties and building brand new ones, but how to economically before is converting duplexes into single-family homes. Overnight, you've doubled your square footage, you have the plumbing, and you can reconfigure fairly well. The only thing is you're removing income-producing property and the rehab costs. So anything that can encourage bringing the housing up to the 21st century, I think would be a huge, and keeping the character would be a huge incentive for people to stay here in Lakewood.
Thanks, Mary. Let's go with another question.
My name's Annabelle Corey, and I want to thank you all for sharing your knowledge. You briefly mentioned a few minutes ago the trend of local food, and I was wondering if you could comment a little bit further on this trend and the use of formerly vacant land for productive agricultural use, and how Lakewood might be able to capitalize on that.
Well, on the local board alone, there's more nonsense being spoken about local farming in the Midwest than anything else. Realize that you define a city, the rural area is the place where the farms actually begin. There are a couple facts about agriculture in Cuyahoga County. The glacier took most of our good soil and gave it to Wayne County. Historically, what was grown in Cuyahoga County were fruits and grapes. So when it comes to row crops and other types of crops, we basically don't have the soil here. The second is that when you look, there is now starting to be some good studies being done about the economic impact of local food. And what it turns out is that urban farming as a business venture is really doing very badly, but community gardens actually do relatively well. Why? Because they're just more intensively farmed. The labor's free and the dirt's free. The only way in which local farming works is basically you have almost indentured labor, and if you don't have to pay the cleanup cost. Now the exception is there are some ethnic farmers that are really good at very intense farming that have high value-added crops, and that really is the niche. The third is that, again, thinking regionally, local food and local farming will actually do very well in Northeast Ohio, but the market area is going to be much larger than one particular city. The challenge, a lot of the slow food and local food folks are actually my students, and we've been fighting about this for a long time. And the issue really is, can it become large enough to go to scale so you can consistently provide supermarkets with food that's convenient? There is a war going on between cost, it's expensive, and time. People don't have still don't have enough time to cook and everything else, so you have to get into the current food distribution network. Now, where the literacy about local farming is the worst is in Detroit, but that's a whole region that needs therapy.
One maybe not rebuttal, but add-on comment to that, and then they'll more about this than I do. But one thing that's always, working in the governor's office, local food was something that we looked at and tried to follow as a policy. In the Cleveland region specifically, one of the things that's interesting is that if you look at the restaurant scene, Cleveland's really beginning to develop a very serious food cluster. Yep. So, where the original ideas of local food were, kind of industrial scale, which really didn't make any sense. And trust me when I say, farmers downstate were kind of, if they even heard hint of that, they would be at the steakhouse the next day, camped out with a tractor, and they wouldn't be leaving. Mm-hmm. There's not that much room in the industrial food production market for Northeast Ohio to play a role.
Yeah, welfare agriculture just doesn't make sense.
But when you talk about a more of a niche play, and what it's meant to the restaurant movement and the food culture, Cleveland is developing something pretty serious here in terms of the quality of restaurants and the quality of commercial food production. And so I think it's still emerging, but there's something there. And if we can get the local food folks to be focused on that niche, we might see some real growth, some real kind of national scale attention brought to the region with that synergy of local food married to the restaurant cluster.
But that's, you got the mix-up. There's a market, so someone can make some damn money out of it. And two, that local food supply chain stretches down to Wayne and Tuscarora's County. And so you need a bigger view. You really have to be truly regional when you talk about local.
Well, I want to invite the panel to stick around for individual questions. If the group would join me in thanking
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much on behalf of Lakewood Alive, on behalf of the city of Lakewood. I know our administration got a lot out of this discussion, and I hope you, the residents, got a lot out of it as well. I would like to thank again Marvin Hayes, Ned Hill, Bill Sanderson, Gus Frangos, and of course, Nate Kelly. To remind everyone that Light Up Lakewood is not far off. It's December 3rd, right here in downtown Lakewood, so please put that on your calendars. And want to again acknowledge our sponsors, the Masonic Temple, for hosting us tonight. Thank you very much. Lakewood Hospital, Discount Drug Mart, Panera Bread, Lakewood Public Library, and Lakewood New Life Church. So thank you to all of our sponsors. I hope everybody has a tremendous, wonderful, safe, and warm Thanksgiving. And when you're thinking about what you're grateful for, join me in what I'm grateful for, and that is a wonderful city like Lakewood. Thank you.